are in listen-only mode.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Hello. So you guys have any questions for me before I get started on Spring IOC and Spring JDBC? Or any questions with respect to Hibernate? Okay. So hope you all are good with the IOC and the Spring JDBC concepts. Right. So let's move. Okay. Let's move on to the Spring MVC concept. As you all know, MVC stands for Model View Controller. We did many examples. Alright, we did many examples on MVC. Right, Model View Controller. So I just want to go back here. I want to show you that MVC2 example. And if you see in MVC2, you have a controller package. You have a DTO, which is your model. And you also have JSPs, that is your view pages. So DTO is your model, JSPs are your views, and your servlet is your controller. So according to MVC architecture, there is only one controller. According to MVC2 architecture, there will be only one controller. According to MVC2 architecture, there will be only one controller. You have a single controller responsible. Guys, do you still find anything screen lagging now, or is it good today? Okay, fine, thank you. Right. So if I start looking at this single controller which I have, let's see what all the job it is doing. First thing is, it need to identify the request is coming from which page. Guys, here, what is this single controller is doing? First we need to identify the step 1. You need to identify the request page. Then read the data from the request page. Read the data from the request page. Then what? After reading the data from the request page, create model object and store the data into it. Then here I am directly invoking the DAO, but actually we need to invoke the service, because later part we learn that we won't be invoking the DAO directly, you invoke the service. And after that, depending on the response from service, invoke the view page. So if you guys observe, your single controller, your single servlet controller is responsible for many things. We see, we can also call different servlets, we can also call same servlet. But thing is, the URL will be different. The URL will be different. We can call single servlet, we can also call multiple servlets. The URL will be the same with parameter value changing. I mean, now as you said, if I wanna, your question was this, like what if, right? If you want to call add to cart as well as show cart, then call the same servlet, but while calling the servlet, you can change the parameter values. Like how will you call? This is what you do, right? XML, whether you do Ajax call using jQuery or if you are doing something like this, you do this, right? You write what? You write the URL, you take question mark, take some parameter equal to, pass the value. If the parameter is 1, then what is this? URL. First we put method type, right? We do, I don't know, I don't remember the exact syntax. So here you say get or post, whatever you say, then you say true asynchronous. Then what is happening here? The URL is same, whether it is add to cart or show cart, the URL is same, but for add to cart the parameter is 1, for show cart the parameter is 2. Then what you do on the servlet? On the servlet, read the parameter value, then accordingly perform the operation. If the parameter is 1, add to cart. If the parameter is 2, it's a show response, a show cart. Suman, did I answer your question or you still have it? Yeah. Alright. Then my concern is a single servlet is responsible for so many things. Like what are the so many things? Like it was reading the data, right? It was first thing is identify the request, second thing is read the data, third thing is store the data into the DTO, then invoke the service, depending on the service call the JSP page. Now let's understand the problems. Let's understand the drawbacks. Now, understand, I have a project. Yeah, that is nothing but URC. It's all good. URI is Uniform Resource Indicator. You just need to do this. URL question mark and you put a parameter and put some value in a double quote. That's it. And that will take care of. Right? And whatever you have seen, can you just put that link? I'll just check and let you know. Wherever you have seen that thing URI equal to, just let me know. I'll just see that and I'll come back to you. Now, coming back, I want to discuss the drawbacks of MVC2. I want to discuss the drawbacks of MVC2. The thing is, here it's identify the request. That is your job 1. Then read the data. Then create model. Store data into model. Then invoke the service. Then invoke the view depending on response of the service. Right. Now this is fine. Now understand, for identifying the request, what are we doing? Okay, we are testing. We are testing with if blocks. We are testing with if blocks. Now the concern is here. Now imagine I have a very big project. I have a very big project, or I have a very big case study. I have a very big case study. And a case study comprises of 1,000 requests. And then there will be 1,000 if blocks. And I think this is what something which is a big problem, because there will be only one single servlet. There will be only one single servlet. You have only one single servlet controller. When you have only one single servlet controller and there are 1,000 requests, then you end up in having what? You end up in having 1,000 blocks. Right? You end up in having 1,000 blocks. Then this is where the problem starts, because the performance goes down. If I make suppose, as I said, 1,000 if blocks. So 1,000 if blocks, in the sense we'll have like this, no? If, else if, so on, else. Now imagine there are 1,000 requests. Now I am making the 999th request. So will I directly go to the 999th? No. I'll be testing the one fail, second fail, third fail, fourth fail, 10th fail, 100 fail, 900 fail, then 999th pass. Means in order to reach the 999, I have to fail so many conditions. So this is what the concern with the single servlet controller. Another thing is, these kind of jobs are more reusable in place. You know what is? See, this is a repeated kind of stuff, right? Identifying the request, reading the data, creating the model, storing the data into the model. This is something which is a reusable stuff. So what framework want to do is, see, understand, you cannot use a framework for very small applications. You cannot use a framework for very small applications because it doesn't make any sense. If your application got only 5 requests, but framework itself will be of so many MVs. The framework itself, every framework needs some jar files. You might be knowing it. Every framework, Hibernate, we use some jar files. Spring also needed some jar files. So every framework needed some jar files, and the jar file itself consumes a lot of memory. And your application is of only 5 requests, and hardly 5 requests means what? 5 pages. Hardly 5 requests means 5 pages. To develop 5 pages, how many bytes of memory it consumes? It not even consumes 1 megabyte of memory. But if you use framework itself will be of some 3 MB or 12 MB or something like, jar files. The collection of jar files amounts to what? 18 MB or 17 MB or whatever. Then when I can finish off my application in 1 MB, why should I depend on framework? So frameworks are recommended only when your application size is larger. Frameworks are recommended only when your application size is larger. Frameworks are recommended only when your application size is larger, but when you have a very small application, it doesn't make any sense to make use of the framework. Better stick to our normal principle MVC2 architecture, model view controller architecture. When your application grows in size, then you start making use of the Spring framework. When your application grows in size, then you start making use of the framework. So Spring framework makes sense when your application is larger. Whereas your Spring MVC makes sense when your application is larger. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So what exactly we are doing with the help of Spring MVC is, Your Spring MVC now divides the single servlet controller of MVC2 into two parts. What is the Spring MVC doing? Spring MVC is dividing the single servlet controller of MVC2 into two parts. I'll just write it as a first part and second part. Then I'll tell you what is the significance of it. The first part is identify the request and create model, store data into model, and then invoke the second part. What does your second part do? Your second part, it invokes the service and gives response back to first part. So the single servlet controller is divided into two, first part and second part. The first part will identify the request, create the model, store the data into the model, invoke the second part. Then it also invoke the view. It also invoke the view depending on response from second part. What is the second part doing? It is invoking the service, gives the response back to the first part. Now in Spring Framework, this first part is referred as, the first part is referred as dispatcher servlet, built in. Alright, it's not user built. Means whatever the task I listed in the first part is built in. You don't need to worry about it. Whatever the task the first part is taking care of. Whatever the task the first part is taking care of. Alright, whatever the task the first part is taking care of. Whatever the task the first part is taking care of is built in. Means I am not responsible for that. That is being taken care by your built-in servlet called dispatcher servlet. Now the second part is what? We call them as controllers. And this is we're going to develop. We're going to develop controllers for every request. We're going to develop controllers for every request. We're going to develop controllers for every request. We're going to develop the controllers now. Here, now the next question arises is, first part is a dispatcher servlet. Then I said it's a built-in. Then how come built-in servlet understands our user requirement? How come built-in servlet understands the user requirement? The user requirement is specified in XML file, but it's not web.xml. The user requirement is specified in XML file. Your dispatcher servlet the dispatcher servlet reads web.xml. The dispatcher servlet reads XML and understands what to do. When I say what to do, understands what to do. It is identifying the request, creating model, storing the data into the model, invoking the second part. This all stuff will be taken care of there. So I'll demonstrate an example, a small case study. I just demonstrate a hello world example using Spring MVC. Right. Guys, any questions on this controller part? Any questions on this controller part, or is it simple? Okay. So I'll come back to the same question again, whether you understood or not after discussing this small activity. I created a normal dynamic web project. Same dynamic web project, right? And I named it as Spring MVC. I have a dynamic web project, named it as Spring MVC. Then I have a web INF. Then in the web INF, I have a lib folder, and to that lib folder, I added the jar files which are needed for a Spring MVC framework. I added those jar files which are must or which are needed for the Spring MVC, which are needed for Spring MVC. Then, as usual, I have a web.xml, and there is one extra XML file. This is specific to the Spring. This is specific to the Spring. This is specific to the Spring framework. Then within the web INF, I have a JSP folder. The advantage of this JSP folder inside the web INF is it is secure. If you see, there is a success.jsp in the JSP folder. In the web INF, there is a JSP folder. Normally, JSP is where? Where do you see the JSPs? You see the JSPs in web content. You see the JSP. Look at this. Here also there is one JSP in the web content. But I have another JSP which is in the web INF. That is, in the web INF there is a JSP folder. You can keep any folder name. Folder name is optional. It's user choice. Now this success.jsp you cannot invoke directly. The success.jsp cannot be invoked directly. I mean, you cannot simply open the browser. You cannot simply open the browser. Okay, you cannot simply open the browser and type the URL. You cannot simply open the browser and type the URL. And you cannot say success.jsp. Why? Because this success.jsp is inside the web INF folder. It's pretty simple thing when it comes to web application. Adding the jar files. In the web INF, you need to create a lib folder, or if the lib folder is already existing, just copy the jar files and right click and paste it. That's it. Wherever you got the jar files, suppose let me show you that. Computer. What is that? Software. Where did we have the jar files? Spring jars. So for Spring MVC, you need an Angular, login, MVC. If you want to use JSPL, you can go for JSPL. ASM, beans, support, context, core, expression, web servlet, and web. Copy these jar files. Right click on the lib folder which is in the web INF. Paste it. That's it you need to do. You don't need to do anything else. And as soon as you paste it, you may not find it in the same place. Just refresh it. Then everything will be okay. Sometimes when I try to create project, look at this. I'm trying to create a here. When I try to create a package here, what happens? Sometimes it will not, you may not find it in the source folder. You may find it somewhere else. See, where do you see? Somewhere else, right? But the moment you refresh, it goes back there. Okay? Okay. Coming back here. So I was telling, what is the advantage of putting the JSP files inside the WebINF folder? Normally, so far we used to keep JSP files in the web content. So far we kept JSP files in the web content. Look. But what is the advantage of putting the JSP files inside the WebINF? It is secure. You cannot invoke it directly. You cannot say success.jsp. Says it's not found. Right? You cannot say that. So the JSPs which are inside the WebINF, they are secure. You cannot access them. You cannot invoke them. Right? Now what exactly I am trying to do in this application? It's a very simple hello world application I am developing. I am developing a very straightforward hello world application. Look, index.jsp. So my first home page is index.jsp. If you want, I can configure it. In the web.xml, I configured my welcome file as what? Index.jsp. So as soon as my launch application, what is the page which gets called? Index.jsp. What is the page which gets called? Index.jsp is the page which gets called when I launch application. As soon as I launch application, the page which gets called is index.jsp. Index.jsp is the file which gets called as soon as I launch application. Now what next? What happens? What is happening in the index.jsp? You are redirecting to some URL. Now just help me out. Where should I search for this URL? Where should I search for the URL? Where should I search for the URL? Come on, that is a very straightforward question we have been doing from the whenever we started web applications. If you have some URL, where that URL will be searching for? When you did your shopping cart application, whether it is a bookstore application, where did you configure add to cart or show cart? Where do you see the URLs? If it is a Java file, if it is a Java Enterprise Edition file, then you have the annotations. If you have a Java Enterprise Edition file, you have annotations. But if it is Java J2E 1.4 and below, if it is J2E 1.4 and below, you look at the web.xml, right? Where do you see the URL pattern? You search for the URL patterns in the web.xml if it is J2E 1.4 or less than J2E 1.4. But if you are working with Java EE5, then you search in the annotations, right? But here, as I said, you divide the controller into two parts, the first part and second part. And the first part is what? Dispatcher servlet. Is the user built? No, it's a built-in. So built-in servlet, you cannot have an annotation. For a built-in servlet, you cannot have an annotation. So if you observe the web.xml, in that web.xml, I configured one servlet tag. In this web.xml, I configured some servlet tag. What is a servlet tag? Dispatcher servlet. What is a servlet tag? Dispatcher servlet. Now, so when I make a request, that is when my index.jsp is invoked, I am being redirected to some URL. So I go to the web.xml and start searching for the URL pattern. Then here I realize that my URL pattern is asterisk.2, it is star.2. What do you mean by star? It's everything. Any URL pattern will be at any URL pattern ending with .do. Any URL pattern, you can have anything. It need not to be a .do. It can be anything. You can also put like this .2. You can keep anything. It's only a pattern. So anything with .to or .do, right, will be taken care by whom? Dispatcher servlet. Will be taken care by whom? Dispatcher servlet. Now what is the name of the servlet? Bean tag. What is the name of the servlet? Bean tag. So with that you see an XML bean-servlet.xml. Suppose in the place of servlet name if you write XYZ, then there should be XYZ-servlet.xml. Since you have a bean, then you have a bean-servlet.xml. Now what happens is this built-in dispatcher servlet will open this bean-servlet.xml. Now what do you do according to the Spring framework? According to the Spring framework, you configure beans. You configure bean tags. So here you have a bean tag. There is a bean tag. So according to this bean tag, what is the URL? See, what is the URL pattern in index.jsp? user/registration.do. It goes to the web.xml, and in the web.xml it realizes that for the URL pattern there is a servlet configured, and that servlet is dispatcher servlet. The name of the dispatcher servlet is bean, and there is an XML file existing called bean-servlet.xml. And when you open that, you see /user/star.do, that is user/registration.do. If somebody is making a request, where it is going? It is invoking a user controller from the virtusa.web. There is a package called web. In that there is a controller, and when you open this controller, you have a controller extending multi-action controller. Now what is the advantage of multi-action controller is you can configure many things. Now you have a registration method. Why you have a registration method? Because what do you is this star index.jsp /user registration.2 web.xml star.2 dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet depends on the XML bean-servlet star. So here, so star can be anything. So what is star now? Registration. So you see a method called registration, right? So within that registration, what is the method returning? Model and view. So the registration is returning a model and view object. But remember, your servlet cannot return anything. What is the return type of do-get method in the servlet? Let's go back and see. Take any example of the servlets which we did. Is your servlet capable of returning something? The servlet got a void method. So servlets cannot return anything. Whereas here also your dispatcher servlet is a built-in servlet. Here dispatcher servlet is a built-in servlet. It also cannot return anything. Dispatcher servlet, which is configured in the web.xml, it's not a user built, it's a built-in. It cannot return any value. But this dispatcher servlet, by seeing the bean-servlet.xml, it is calling a controller, and that controller got the method which will return something. And this method is taking what arguments? HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. Now what are you doing here? You are returning a model and view. Now this model and view takes three arguments. I'll tell you what is the significance of this line. I'll tell you what is the significance of this line. First argument represents what view to be invoked. First argument represents what view to be invoked. Second argument is alias name. Your second argument is alias name holding the third argument value. Holding the third argument. Second argument is alias name holding the third argument. So what it is returning? Success. So let's go back here. So when it is returning a success, observe guys, this is very important. There is something called view resolver. So your user controller is returning what? A success, a string. Now that string, with the help of this view resolver, what is the suffix? Success.jsp. What is the prefix? WebInf.jsp. So I need to invoke the JSP file which is in the JSP folder of WebInf. This is the page it is calling. So let me run this application. I think I need to restart it. It's actually caching the thing. It can be anything. It need not to be the dot. Okay, fine. I made a change in the web.xml, but I didn't change it in the here, the main -servlet. That was the problem. So okay, just give me a minute. God. Okay, I think did I make a mistake here? Perfect. Now let me go back here. How is this hello Arun message is appearing on the screen? Because this model and view is equivalent to request dot set attribute then we do this, right? Request dot get request dispatcher. Then I say here success dot JSP dot forward request response. So this is what the two lines mean. This single line means. The single line is equivalent to these two lines. So on the success.jsp, what you're going to do? We know that we have an expression language. I just going to make use of it. And I just print dollar of message. The value in the message gets printed.
Hi Arun. So in that one, the success mean the success.jsp file.
Oh, success means success is a string actually.
Okay.
And this string will be resolved here. You have an XML file, right? There is something called bean-servlet.xml. So the string success will be resolved with the help of this bean resolver.
Okay. What it is doing? If the message is success, then no. How you are relating? I don't get it. This part.
The message is not success. It's a string.
Okay.
That is representing a JSP only. See, what is that I said you? The first argument represents what? View, right?
Yeah.
The second argument is alias name holding the third argument.
Yeah, that's what then I am asking. So the success is the success JSP or meaning or what it means?
You cannot say it's a JSP. It's a view name.
Okay.
We don't know whether it is a JSP or HTML. Unless and until you see here, whether it is a view JSP or HTML, you cannot say, right? Suppose if I have written JSP here, so it will be JSP. If I put HTML, it will be HTML, right?
Okay.
You see, if I write HTML,
so
yeah, go ahead.
So we can give some other name, some other thing also for success. We can give some other name also, or what it means.
Yeah, you can give any name to it. It need not, see here I have my JSP labeled as what? Success.jsp, right?
Okay.
So here I have my file as success.jsp. So that is the reason I am returning success string. If I had something xyz.jsp, I might have written xyz.
Oh, okay.
So on the whole, your JSP name will be returned, or your JSP or HTML, whatever it is. Your view name will be returned.
So the file name. So we can say it a file name?
Yes.
Okay.
Only the file name without extension.
Okay. Thank you.
So the flow is very simple. Let me show you a tutorial. I think it's there in tutorialspoint.com. Java. Spring MVC framework. Yeah. So look at the flow. What is happening is whenever you make a request in the web.xml, what is configured? Dispatcher servlet. Now this dispatcher servlet will look at the XML file bean-servlet. It need not to be bean-servlet. In a dispatcher servlet, what is the servlet name? Bean. So you have bean-servlet.xml. Now it opens the bean-servlet.xml. These bean tags are nothing but handler mappings. The bean tags are nothing but handler mappings. So whenever you make a request, it goes to dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet look at those bean tags and invoke the controller. See, by looking at the bean tag, so URL pattern matches, then you are calling a controller. Then in the controller, some method gets executed, and that method is returning a model and view. See, controller. Now what is the controller will give you? Controller will give you model and view object. Controller gives you back model and view object. Now what you do, that model and view object you are giving it to view resolver. That is, when you return success, it won't directly go to the success JSP. It goes to this view resolver. Now the view resolver will give you the suffix and the prefix. Now depending on after concatenating the suffix and the prefix, the view is ready. Then call the view success.jsp. View resolver will resolve the page and you invoke the JSP. And it's clearly been mentioned here. After receiving an HTTP request, dispatcher servlets look at the handler mapping. Handler mapping is nothing but your bean tags. And it calls appropriate controller. Appropriate controller invokes the method. Then after invoking the method, it returns a view name. It returns the view name to the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet takes help from the view resolver and invokes the view. Once the view is finalized, dispatcher servlet will give the data. That's what happened, right? So your also data goes. After resolving the view, you know that you have to call success.jsp, and on the success.jsp you have to print some data, and that data your already controller is sent to you with the help of this. Hello, it's a string, so hello Arun, so it gets printed. Yeah, guys, any questions, or is it clear for all of you? Alright then, let's do another example which involves MVC as well as Hibernate. Are you okay with this example, or shall I do this example? Because I just demonstrated the example which is already written. If you want, I can also write the develop the program now. If you want to understand the flow, okay, fine. Let me quickly do it. It's very simple. You just need to create a dynamic web project. You need a web.xml. The first thing is you need the jar files. So I just get the jar files from the previous application. It is very, very important to add only those jar files which are needed. Otherwise, you end up in lot of problems while developing and also in the execution environment. So here we go. Web list folder, right click, paste. I added all the jar files. Now I develop in the web content a JSP file. Let's name it as index. I don't need all this stuff. I have this script left. I can do this response. I'm just doing the same example. That's it. It goes to web.xml. Now in the web.xml you have a welcome file list, but I don't have these many pages. Get rid of all of them. I know there is a request. For every request need to be attended by a servlet. Servlet name. You can give any name. I'm just giving the name as a dispatcher. Then there should be a servlet class. You need to remember this class name. Because configuration is a one-time job, it is very difficult for someone to remember these names. And there is a servlet mapping. Servlet name. What is the servlet name I offered for dispatcher? URL pattern. You can give any pattern. Perfect. Then what now? Okay. You need to develop an XML file. So right click on the web INF and you need to pick an XML file. So what would be the name? Servlet name hyphen servlet.xml. Click on the next and finish. So what I do is I don't know the doc type. I mean this part I cannot remember. So what I do is I just copy this as it is. And put it here. Okay, done. Now what next? Okay. So let's look at the index.jsp for the URL pattern. user/registration.do. Perfect. So user/start.do. Start.do means this controller can handle multiple things. Done. Create a package. Now in this package create a class. Let the class name be, you can use any name. Now I need to pick a parent here, super class. Multi-action controller from Spring framework. That's it. Let Yeah. Then what I need to do here is what is the name? Registration. So with that name I can add a method. For return type it can be model and view. The method name registration. Here you can say HTTP servlet request. HTTP servlet response. Perfect. You can say return new model and view. You can also only pass string also. You can only pass string also. So here in the web INF, create a folder. It is not mandatory to create a folder. You can directly write a JSP. Hello. Prompt. Whatever you want to write, you can write. It's done. Let's run this project. Run on server. Next. Finish. Done. Okay. Now in case if you want to send some value, then give data or name of the person. Whatever you want to do that. Username. Then you go to the JSP. You can put it here. Dollar. So the flow is very simple if you understand. Yeah. Any questions before I move on to the next application? Oh, you have a question? Okay. Let's get back to the next application. Again, it's an MVC application, but this time I'm using a database connectivity also. I'm also using a database connectivity here. So the number of jar files I added is more now, because I also need to add jar files with respect to JDBC also, right? With respect to database connectivity. That is Hibernate. So I have my regular jar files. In addition, I have what? This ASM attribute, cglib, and commons collection, commons pool, DOM, EJB persistence, Hibernate, Hibernate 3. These are all with respect to Hibernate. These are the jar files for Hibernate. So there are a lot of jar files I added. So let me run the application first. Right click, run as, run on server. See what is happening, and I'll tell you how I accomplished it. Yeah. So this is what I have. Okay. So Arun, change your password and country. This is what I'm doing. It is adding to the database, and after adding the data to the database, I'm reading everything here. Let me add another information. So there is a database connectivity involved also here. So first page is redirect.jsp, where you are calling what? List.html. So look at the web.xml, and in the web.xml you realize that the URL ending with .html is invoking dispatcher servlet, and this dispatcher servlet is not a user built, it's a built-in, and this built-in dispatcher servlet depends on dispatcher-servlet.xml, and when you open this dispatcher-servlet.xml, you see a lot of XML stuff. But before we go there, let me do it here. Look at the line number 32 to 34. Okay, if you look at the line number 32 to 34, what do you see? You have a bean tag, user/star.html, is anything.html. What is that you are calling? User controller. And into this user controller, what is the property you are injecting? User DA. Into the controller, what is the property you are injecting? User DA. Into the controller, you are injecting a user DAO object. But where is this user DAO? Property name is user DAO, and it is referring to an object called myUserDAO, which is created here. And this myUserDAO class object is taking what property? Session factory. I hope you remember, right? So if you observe, let's look at this package data programs here, where this controller got a property. What is the property the controller got? User DAO. And we know that after learning Spring Framework, I am not going to create any object. I am going to inject the object. After learning Spring Framework, I am not going to create any object. Rather, I am going to inject the objects, maybe using a setter injection or maybe using a constructor injection. Either through a constructor injection or through a setter injection, I am going to inject the object. I am not going to create object. I am not going to create object. Rather, I am going to inject object. So your controller has a property called the user DAO, and your user DAO got a property called hibernate template. That is, you have a session factory. Right? You have a session factory. Now, how do you do this? So that's what is in the XML document. In the XML document, what do you have is You have a controller which is where I'm injecting a DAO object. You have a DAO where I'm injecting a session factory object. And I created a session factory object here, and in this session factory object I'm injecting what? Data source object. Whereas data source is configured here. So I have a data source object, and the data source object is injected into the session factory. Now this session factory is injected into a DAO, and DAO is injected into the controller, and rest of the things are familiar to you. The only thing new to you is your session factory. Into the session factory you are using something here. You are telling the annotation classes, because you are not doing any mapping. You are not doing any mapping. You are using annotations for mapping. You are using annotations to mapping. So that information you specified here. You have a property called annotated classes, and in that you have a list, and you can list all the annotated classes. All your domains should be mapped here. Oh, that is something you need to read it. Which jar files need to be added, which jar files not is added is you look at the official website of the framework. If you look at the official website of the framework, for everything you'll have an official website. So if you see Hibernate tutorials, you always see tutorials point Java 4S, dzone. Look at this. Doc.jboss. So JBoss community has given this Hibernate. So if you look at this, then you can see this stuff. So in these examples, he will tell you what all the jar files are needed to develop an application. Similarly, for Spring Framework, there is a community. Simple. For Spring also you have a separate official website. From there you can look at actually. So here these guys will help you with some examples. Right, JDBC integration, look at this. You can look here somewhere, you'll see uploading files, consuming web services. So from this we can just see and understand what jar files are needed. And even if that doesn't solve, when you run the application, it will give you errors. And by seeing the error messages also, we can figure out that some jar files are missing. By seeing the error messages also, we can figure out some jar files are missing or not. So the only thing which is new here is you need to specify those mapping classes like this. Property name equal to annotated classes. You got a list, and in the list you need to specify what all the domain classes are there. And after that, things are very simple here. If you start observing, it goes to the user controller, and user controller, what is the URL pattern? What is the URL value when you go to the index.js or whatever it is? List. So in the user controller there are two methods. One is the add method, other one is the list method. And add method is okay, but we are in the list method. You have an add method. Add method is calling a DAO save user method, and the list method is calling a list user method. Right. Now what are we doing in this DAO programs? So DAO programs are simple one, right? We did Hibernate DAO so many. So if you look at this, What do you have here? You have a Hibernate template. So if you remember Hibernate, then you do a lot of stuff. Session equal to new configuration dot configure dot build session key. But here you don't need to do all the stuff. You don't need to do all the stuff. You can simply say Hibernate template. And using that Hibernate template, you can call the method save or update to save it, and the find method from user1 to retrieve the data from the database. So to get the data from the table, you just call the find method, and to save the data into the database, you call the save or update method. So this is something new, Hibernate template. The Hibernate template is using a session factory. You are creating that object and you are invoking the methods. So if you observe the user controller, right, you have a save user and list method. So what is happening is when you call redirect, it is calling list. So it goes to the web.xml. Anything.htm goes to the dispatcher servlet. And here you see that you have to call user controller. In the user controller, you will be invoking a list method. But the list method, I'm returning a model and view. But if you observe, this model and view is taking a string. The second argument is model map. I'll tell you what is the significance of this. I'll tell you the significance of this. Request dot set attribute user list. And here user DAO dot list user. And again request dot set attribute user for. You are sending an empty object. I'll tell you why. So how many attributes you have? You have only two. You have two attributes. But in your last example, there was only one attribute. In your last example, there was only one attribute, but in this example, you have two attributes. Request dot get request dispatcher. This is the user form. Dot forward. You got a request. You got a response. But whatever we studied last time, model and view. According to that model and view, you can pass the JSP name, alias name, but I want to send what? I want to send two arguments, not one argument. Now with the help of this model and view, you can send only one attribute. With the help of model and view, you can send one attribute. You cannot send two. With the help of model and view, you can send one attribute. You cannot send two. With the help of model and view, you can send one attribute, not two. But in case if you want to send two attributes, then you need to take model map. You need to take model map. To that model map, add the attributes. To that model map, add the attributes. And then, while creating model and view, the first argument is what? JSP. The second argument is what? Model map. the second argument is model map. Alright, we use model map to send more than one attribute. Then let me go to the user form.jsp, and if you observe, there is a table at the bottom. I'm checking. You know there are JSTL tags, there are code tags, there are function tags. We discussed this too when we studied JSTL. Code tags and function tags. So with the help of the function tags and code, this is your code tag, you're testing. If the length of that user list is greater than 0, then you are creating a table. Let's observe. You are creating a table because when you see that screen, when you saw the screen for the very first time, there was no table. When you saw the screen for the very first time, there was no table because there was no data. Because the length of the user list was greater than 0, no. Then what are you doing? You have a table and you have a table header. One table row is finished and there is a for loop to display the data from the array list. To display the data from the array list. For displaying the data. If there is a data, you display it because the table is constructed only when the length of the array list is greater than 0. If it is not, there is no table. No table means no data. Now, other thing is, now when I click on this submit button, what happens? Look at the form. When you click on the submit button, you are calling what? add.htm. When you click on the submit button, you are calling what? add.htm. So, add method gets called. Now what are you doing? This add method is taking 3 arguments. Request, response, user. Guys understand? Normally how will you do it? You create a user object. Then what do you do? Then you say user.set. Right. This is what you do. Request.get parameter. This is what we learned in servlets. But I'm not doing all this stuff. Why I'm not doing all this stuff? How come the data is coming to me then? You're not doing this. Your data is already available here in the method. So how this is happening is, see, when you are calling this user form, you are sending 2 attributes. One is the list of users, other one is a new user object. That is, if you look at the form, there is a command name called user. That is, when you are displaying the page, this is one extra attribute here. And you are not using your normal form tag. You are using the Spring form tag. The way you have a JSTL code tag, JSTL function tags, Spring provides its own tags. One of them is form tag. Spring got its own tag called form tag. And with the help of that form tag, what are you doing here? You have an action attribute, you also have a command name. Command name is the object name. What is the attribute name here? User. It is an object of what type? User1. So you are assigning a command name here. What is the advantage of putting the command name here? Whatever the data which is in the text field or password field or radio button, that all data gets into the user object automatically. I am binding a data object with the HTML form. I am binding my model. This is my model. The user is my model. I am binding my model with the HTML input elements. So whatever the data you enter into this, that gets stored into this command name. And that command name becomes your third argument here. In the add method, the command name becomes the third argument. So you already have it. So on the DAO, you are calling the method to save it. On the DAO, you are calling the method to save it. And after saving, what are you doing? You are redirecting it to list.html. Because when I click on the submit button, what should happen? You should go and get the data again. Because when I add here, then I'm adding another record. So when I'm adding another record, what happens? When I click on the register button, it is calling add.html. And your add.html is reading the data with the help of the third argument, and you are saving into the database with the help of a DAO, and you are redirecting it to list. That is, you are calling the list method. And what is the list method doing? Getting all the data from the user to the database and creating a new empty object. It's a new object, new empty object. Associating a new user1 object with the form in JSP. Then a empty form appears with the third record. Okay, I think I restarted it. So what happened was the earlier data was destroyed. The previous, okay, let me add one more. Oh, what is happening here? Something has gone wrong. Let's look at this. We make any changes. This starter icons are okay. I think I did create. And change it to update. Now that should not be a problem. So you go and fetch all the data, and again you get an empty object for the form. Yeah. Any questions on this part? Hey. Okay. Yes, the second attribute is just for the empty form. The second attribute is just for the empty form. Yeah, then can you speak now?
Yeah, Arun, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. No, just I wanna know which you said no the first in that Spring MVC the first part is built-in one and the second part only we are creating our own programs, right?
Yes.
Can you explain in this the application which one is the built-in part, which one we are doing the second part, which one we are doing?
You let me know, right? You let me know which is the built-in part here. Are we identifying the request? Am I doing something like
today? Yeah, today my audio is very poor. I got disconnected so many times. Only the audio, so I couldn't hear you well.
Okay, just give me a minute. Okay, here if you see your dispatcher servlet which is configured in the web.xml is your first part.
Okay.
This is the dispatcher servlet, right? Which is configured. Okay. We didn't develop this servlet. It's already been developed. Did I develop any servlet called dispatcher servlet here? No.
No.
Right. So that is your built-in servlet, and that built-in servlet is relying on the XML file called dispatcher-servlet.xml. Okay. So that is your first part.
Okay.
Because why I call it as the first part? See, this is where it is here to identify the request, and it will call the second part. You are calling the second part user controller, right?
Okay.
So your user controller is second part, which is calling the service or DAO. Okay. So your dispatcher servlet is a built-in servlet. It uses this XML file. That is your first part.
Oh, okay. So the dispatcher servlet will be created by itself. So when we are creating the dispatcher servlet XML file, is that you are saying, right?
No. What happens is, as soon as any request is there, where it will go to web.xml, right?
Okay.
So in the web.xml, you see this dispatcher servlet. I think you forgot again. That is, you just need to go back and look at the servlet life cycle. Dispatcher servlet. Whenever we configure servlets in the web.xml, what happens? A request comes, then I start searching for the servlet object. If the object is found, then servlet will process the request. If the object is not found, a new object is created and request is processed.
Yes.
Right. So it's a built-in servlet, and this built-in servlet will use this XML file. It reads this XML document.
Okay.
After reading this XML document only, it will understand that for this request, this controller should be called. Then that controller is needing a user DAO object, and it goes to the user DAO. Now this user DAO need a session factory. It takes the session factory and calls the method.
Okay.
And
yeah, thank you. Let me go through it one more time and maybe I will get a better idea. Thank you, Arun.
Sure. Next thing is, Suman, you had your question. The question is, user, right? You said second attribute. The second attribute is actually not needed. The second attribute is not needed in case if you are doing differently. I mean, what I am doing here, I am adding from the same page, I am displaying it on the same page.
Yeah.
So that is the reason I have two attributes. Now in case if I add from one page and display it on another page, then I need second attribute for add page and first attribute for display page. But in this example, you need the second attribute because you also have your add page here. You are also adding it here. So for this example, the two attributes are must. For this example, here these two attributes are needed. The first attribute is helping you in display. The second attribute is helping you to add. Every form in a JSP should be associated with some attributes. I mean, in the JSP you have this form tag, right? For this form tag, the command name is must. What is command name? Command name is nothing but a new object. For every form tag, action attribute is mandatory. In the same way, command name is also mandatory. This is not your regular HTML form. This is the form provided by Spring Framework. This is the form tag provided by Spring Framework. And for this form tag, the command name is mandatory. And what is this command name? That is nothing but an empty user object or empty data object or empty model object. It's an empty model object. It is must.
Okay. So just to empty the table, to create a new table.
No. See, the thing is, it has nothing to do with the table. See, now what do you expect? If you look at your normal servlet program, what do you do? Now imagine, forget about Spring Framework. You have your normal form tag, right?
Yeah.
What do you write for this normal form tag? You write an action attribute, right? Yes? Then you have some input fields here. Maybe a text field, password field, radio button, whatever. Then you write a controller. Oh, sorry, you write a servlet program. Tell me, what do you do on the servlet program?
We call user DO.
No. Before you call user DAO, what will you do?
Create object.
Yeah.
User.
Then you do this, right?
Yeah.
How do you get the name? You on the HTML you will have a text field, and from that text field you get the name, right?
Yeah.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
Similarly, you fetch all the data. Are you doing after fetching all the data? You create DAO object. Or you create or you inject. If you do Spring Framework, you inject.
Insert. Yeah.
Then after that, you call what method?
Dot
Insert
insert.
method
Use.
to insert the data, right?
Yeah.
Now, but are we doing these steps? Now, see, these steps are happening in controller now. But right. But what about these steps? Who is doing these things for you? You have a built-in servlet called dispatcher servlet. So that will taking care of it. But to the dispatcher servlet, you should tell that which object it should create. See, are we doing this now in the Spring Framework?
No.
We are not doing it, right? So Spring Framework is taking care of, right? But how your Spring Framework can take care of? You have to tell the Spring Framework. So with the help of this command name, you are telling your Spring Framework that whatever the data you enter into this input fields, all data you read it and store into this user. But this user is of what type? Your attribute is of what type? The user attribute is of what type? User one type.
User one. Okay.
Is it clear now? So whenever, okay, fine. Let's do this. Let me quickly do one example. Dynamic web project. You have a Spring form demo. Let me copy the stuff. I mean, let me copy this dict folder content. Control. You have a web content, web IM. Perfect. Now what I do is, you have a user form.jsp. I get rid of this temple now, table tag here. I have just a form. I have a simple form here.
Okay.
Okay. Now what I do is, I have an index.jsp. Now this index.jsp response.send redirect user slash list.html. Okay. So I'm calling something, or let's not do this. Okay. Invoke form. Dispatcher icon servlet. Okay. So what do you have here? Invoke form.html. Then you have a user controller.
It's calling user controller now.
Okay. So here, right click, new, class, browse, multi-action controller. Finish. Now in this multi-action controller, public, model and view, invoke form, servlet request, servlet response, close, exception, return, new, model and view. You have to call user form, but user form need an object to be associated. Right. Now let me go here and get that object. Domain. Now what is this happening? You are calling a JSP, right? When you are calling a JSP, you are sending some attribute. That is, you are sending an empty object. You are sending an empty object, and that empty object is being associated here. Now, what is the advantage? The advantage is you have to what you need to do on the controller part. Alright, there should be another method. Public model and view add HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, comma. Look at this. User 1 I am passing. But from where do I get this? From where do I get this user 1? Because when you click on the submit button of the form, you are calling add.htm. You specified command name. Now, what is this command name? User. The user is of what type? Before you specified, it is of user 1 type. Now, when you click on the submit button, you will be invoking a method called add, and that takes 3 arguments. The first is request, response, and the next one is user. Now here, provide user DAO. There should be a getter setter method here. Source, we need a getter, just need a setter. Perfect. Now using this, look, user DAO dot save user, you are passing the user object. Now you need to say success or failure. So now you are going to say return new model and view, call some page, send some message, inserted. Now I need to develop one more thing. Just put it $. Done. Right click, run as, run on server. We start the server. Probably, what is the page? It was index.jsp, right? So in the web.xml, index dot. You can just start it again. Yeah. thing is, whenever you wanna submit the data, what will you use? You use a form. So with that form, a object need to be associated. Why I should associate an object? If you associate an object, then you don't need to do request dot get parameter. Whatever the data you enter in the input field, the data gets stored into the third argument. The data gets stored into the third argument. You can directly do this. Now imagine if this is not there in Spring framework. Then what you will do? You say request dot get parameter, get parameter, get parameter. You have 100 fields. If you do request dot get parameter 100 times, get the data, store into the object, you call the method. So this is whatever the task, like creation of data object, reading the data from the HTML, storing into the data object. Who is doing all these things for you? This is all taken care by your configured dispatcher servlet, which is not developed by us, which is a built-in. How your dispatcher servlet will come to know? The dispatcher servlet will come to know with the help of this XML document, and when you submit the data, you have a command name. So through this, your dispatcher servlet will be able to understand what it should do. It should know that it has to create an object of user type, and it should read the data from the HTML, store into the user object, and call this add method. Then in the add method, that is your job to do what you want to do with the data object. Whether you want to save it, whether you want to print it, or you want to simply do nothing. It's completely up to you. Okay, you guys got a clarity, or you still have a questions on it?
Yeah, it's clear now.
Okay. See, even go through this example, or you try to work out this example, and if you have any questions, we'll discuss it in the next session.
So when we click on this register, this invoke form and this add method, it calls automatically the add one also.
Yes, it will get invoked automatically. So when you click on the submit button, it is add.htm, right?
Yeah.
So it goes to the web.xml. Anything will go to the web.xml. But in the web.xml, what is there? .htm. So it goes to the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will read this XML document. After seeing this XML document, it invokes the user controller. In the user controller, you see the methods with the add. What is the HTML?
Okay.
Add.htm, right? So the name matches.
Yeah.
So the add method gets called.
Okay.
Alright?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. So first thing is, you got your browser. Okay, but before you get your browser, what is happening is, you are calling an index.jsp. So index.jsp what is this index.jsp got? Index.jsp got some URL value. What is that URL value the index.jsp got is? It is redirecting it to user/invoke form .html. Then what happens? It reaches your container. This is your web container. This completely is your web container. Now what is this web container? This web container web container read web.xml, and when it reads web.xml, or you can say read URL pattern in web.xml and invokes dispatcher servlet. Now what happens? Oh, invoke dispatcher servlet. Now this is, imagine this is your dispatcher servlet. This is your dispatcher servlet. Now what is this dispatcher servlet? Now this query is dispatcher servlet. Now this dispatcher servlet reads dispatcher hyphen servlet.xml. It reads dispatcher servlet hyphen.xml, right, and invokes user controller. Why it will invoke user controller? Because what is the URL pattern? Invoke form.html. User slash invoke form.html. So if you see, anything .html goes to dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will dispatcher hyphen servlet.xml. User slash star can be anything. Invoke form.html. It is calling what? User controller. So what exactly happens is, it is not invoking user controller, it invokes invoke form method of user controller. So it is invoking the user form method, invoke form method of the user controller. Now what it is returning? Invokes, and the method, and what is this method returning? This method returns the user form. This method returns what? User form. So what is this method returning? User form. What is user form? We don't know. Go to dispatcher servlet. There is a view resolver. There is a prefix and suffix. Then we understood that in the JSP. But when I open the JSP, I see a form tag. When I open the JSP, I see a form tag. Returns view user form. And the corresponding JSP, what is the corresponding JSP got? The corresponding JSP got an a form tag, got an a Spring form tag, and form tag, and expects what? Expects a model object. Spring form tag got a strong Spring form tag, it needs a model object. So that is the reason you are passing what? A model object. Now, expects a model object. This is done. Now again what happens? Again this time you have what? Now you have a user form.jsp. So actually expects a model object. Dispatcher servlet is expecting a model object. Sorry, the Spring form tag expects a model object. So what is happening now? Invokes the method of the controller, and controller returns the view user form and the corresponding JSP got a string form tag and expects a model object. So binded, what did we binded? So binded object of type user1 with user form. So that is, we are done with that. Now what do we have? Now you have a user form.js. Because once you have the JSP, you are calling what? You click on the submit button. Now again when you click on the submit button, this time what are you doing now? This time it is add.html. Now what happens? Again web container reads the URL pattern in web.xml, invokes the dispatcher servlet. Now dispatcher servlet, what it will do? Read the dispatcher-servlet.xml. Now what it will do this time is, this is your case 1. Okay, sorry. Whatever the summary I have written, that is for invoke form. That is what invoke form request. Now what I am going to write, that is for add.html. Now what happens now? When it comes to add.html, when we click submit, it stores data into command object and invokes, it stores data into command object and invokes add method of user controller. Clear? It stores data into the command object. When you click on the submit button, it invokes add method of the user controller. And you know well what is happening inside this add method. Whatever the data you get, you are just saving it into the database with the help of Diego, and you are returning a success message. And add method stores user into DB and calls success with message inserted. So when you make a request, it goes to the container read .xml, then it will invoke the dispatcher servlet will call the controller, it will call the methods of the controller, and depending on the output, it will return the response back. So when you call index.jsp, what was the response it gave back? It gave the response as, for this invoke form, what is the response? The response was user form.js. The response was user form.js. But when you did add.html, what was the response? When you did add.html, the response was success.js. And this is the response here. Means the response doesn't come from dispatcher servlet directly. It goes all the way again. The response doesn't come from controller. It comes from dispatcher servlet only. So whenever you have a form tag, to that form tag, a object needs to be binded. To that form tag, we need to bind an object. Why we need to bind an object? Because when you click on the submit button, the form tag when you click on the submit button, I should carry the data to the controller, and that is done automatically by Spring Framework. So that is the reason we always bind an empty object with a form tag. Yeah, is this clear?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
Alright guys, okay. I would like to stop here, and I will discuss few more miscellaneous examples of Spring Framework, because now I am returning a model and view object. Then how to make Ajax calls and get the data, how to get the response from Spring Framework. This was a normal one. When we make an Ajax call, how do we get the response from Spring Framework? Then there will be a layout example called tiles and security examples. All miscellaneous things we will discuss tomorrow about the Spring Framework. With respect to Spring Framework, we will discuss tomorrow. And if you have any questions, we'll take it up also tomorrow. So thanks everyone. Catch you in the next session.